On a special edition of Brian Ross Investigates, Scamdemic. It didn't take long. The scammers are already hard at work with fake pandemic equipment, cures, and come-ons.
The FDA obtained an injunction barring Genesis 2 from selling MMS as a coronavirus cure.
Peddled remedies include music therapy, bee pollen, and intravenous vitamin C.
We'll talk with the senior official at the Federal Trade Commission with what you need to know.
The government is never going to call you and ask for personal information over the telephone.
Plus, with friends like these, it's been 19 years since the 9/11 attacks, and now an FBI goof-up has inadvertently revealed the name of a Saudi diplomat in Washington suspected of helping the hijackers settle in the U.S. Families of the victims say it helps prove their theory of Saudi complicity.
Cannot understand why they wouldn't provide that information to the families so that we could prove our case in court.
And your questions about COVID-19 and the law. Your job, your home, your rights, your wedding.
We really need the funds.
Please tell me where to turn.
From the Law&Crime Network, this is a special COVID-19 edition of Brian Ross Investigates. Thank you for joining us and welcome to our viewers on YouTube Live and Facebook Live. I'm Brian Ross with this special report on COVID-19 and the law. I'm joined today by Rhonda Schwartz from the Law&Crime Network, executive producer of this program. And Rhonda, one thing we know is that even during a pandemic, people are falling in and out of love. And later we're going to talk about marriage and divorce, all kinds of questions about that. But as investigative reporters, we also know that the crooks and the scammers don't stop just because there's a pandemic, and they're taking full advantage of COVID-19.
That's right. The COVID-19 related scams are growing like a virus. The Federal Trade Commission reports 39,000 reports of fraud, and that consumers may have lost as much as $35 million from COVID-19 scams, Brian.
That's right. Now watch this report we put together of various examples from around the country.
Scammers are using the coronavirus outbreak and people's fears to steal their money and personal information.
This scam started with a simple Google search for medical masks.
Websites like this one ensnare victims by offering hard-to-get medical supplies for outrageous prices.
All tonight for the Federal Trade Commission to crack down on fake or unproven coronavirus treatments and cures. Senator Charles Schumer says the peddled remedies include music therapy, bee pollen, and intravenous vitamin C.
Prosecutors say the site claimed to offer consumers access to vaccine kits from the World Health Organization. It sounds official. There are currently no vaccines to treat this disease.
The FDA obtained an injunction barring Genesis 2 from selling MMS as a coronavirus cure.
Stimulus checks are being deposited and mailed, and scammers want their cut of the action.
Stimulus checks are rolling out right now, and scammers know it, and they want a piece of the action.
A lot of the scams we're seeing is the phone scams, email, and text message scams. And that's one thing that really needs to be vigilant about is keeping your identity and bank account information safe.
To get a better understanding of how you can protect yourself from these scams, I talked earlier today with Andrew Smith. He's head of the Bureau of Consumer Protection at the Federal Trade Commission. Andrew Smith, thank you so much for joining us. You know, I guess we shouldn't be surprised with people trying to make an illegal buck off this pandemic.
Right. We're seeing a variety of scams and outright frauds in many cases, trying to take advantage of consumers' fear, essentially, associated with the coronavirus pandemic.
I see some of the warning letters, and you've sent dozens of them to people offering all sorts of cures and treatments, ultra high frequencies, music, all kinds of things. Is it actually, are people actually trying to buy it?
Well, so the warning letters are really effective because it's a very fast hit. You know, the minute that the promise goes up that says this can prevent, cure, treat coronavirus or COVID-19, we send the warning letter, and within 48 hours, the false claims come down. I mean, that's what we have found with warning letters. I think in many instances, there hasn't been much of an opportunity for consumers to buy these sort of scammy dietary supplement and similar products.
Of all the supposed treatments and cures that you've seen, which ones really strike you as the most egregious?
Well, you mentioned the music, and there are certain claims that just jump off the page as though this can't possibly work. I will tell you that the scariest claims that we see are probably not the coronavirus scams and cures. It's more the robocalls to people saying this is the Social Security Administration and your benefits have been suspended and you need to call us at this number in order to get them restored. There also are scams associated with government stimulus checks and things like this, where I think that there is a real opportunity for consumers to lose real money. And we've been active with respect to those kinds of, I would really call those frauds, with respect to those frauds as well.
And what do they try to do if they're trying to talk to you about your Social Security account or your stimulus checks?
Well,
What's the scammer's goal there?
Right. And a lot of times it appears as though they are fishing for personal information. They'll tell you to enter your Social Security number or to call a number and, provide personal information. Occasionally, they will say that, you need to send a money transfer to a particular address in order to get your stimulus check or worse, gift cards, right? And so that's a dead giveaway. The government is never going to call you and ask for personal information over the telephone. The government is never going to call you and ask you to send a wire transfer or a gift card in order to get a government check. That's where you really need to be on guard.
And what is your best advice for people who are getting these robocalls with sort of scary threats and warnings about their finances?
Well, the easiest advice is to hang up. And, of course, don't press any buttons. Frequently, the calls will say things like, if you want to be placed on our do not call list, press 1. Pressing 1 just verifies that this is a live number. And it will virtually guarantee additional robocalls. The other thing is to complain to the FTC at ftc.gov/complaint. It's funny, we have been very active over the last several months at going after the companies that support illegal robocalls, and they do this through VoIP services. And we have been sending warning letters to them as well to tell them to stop serving these illegal robocallers. And the strange, I say it's strange, it's sort of counterintuitive to me, is that it's actually been working. We have seen a dramatic drop since the beginning of this year, before the pandemic. We have seen a dramatic drop in robocalls and illegal telemarketing calls. And that's not to say that they've stopped, but we have actually made a dent, which is a nice thing to be able to say. And so we are, your complaints matter, and those allow us to trace back the illegal calls to their source, as well as all the middlemen in between who made that call happen.
Let me ask you, tracing it back to the source, who's doing this? Are these people that are running scams night and day, no matter what's going on? They just latched on to the pandemic?
Well, what we have seen recently is offshore call centers. So these might be, call centers in Asia. And they are making robocalls, originating robocalls, and they're introduced into the U.S. telecommunications system by telecommunications carriers who, you and I have never heard of. They're very small companies. They provide services to other legitimate as well as not legitimate callers. And the signal wends its way through the U.S. telecommunications system until it gets to your carrier, AT&T, Verizon, who brings it the last mile to your house. So what we're trying to do is look at the middlemen in that transaction who are actually facilitating this spammy traffic.
I've been receiving calls that are robocalls, but the caller ID comes up with the name of the hospital in my local community. How do they do that? And that's a kind of warning, isn't it? Don't accept the caller ID as proof that that's who's actually calling.
Well, it's interesting. The caller ID is an issue. And in fact, we're taking action against companies that provide those caller ID services as well. And you can spoof numbers. You know, sometimes we have a case right now where the number that was being spoofed was 911. That's clearly not appropriate. You know, no one can use 911 except for 911 services. They also will spoof IRS or SSA numbers. Now, there is this new law that was passed at the end of last year by Congress. I believe it's called the Traced Act, and that allows telecoms to block more calls, and also requires them to implement a system where they can verify that the number that's being called is an actual number, not a spoofed number. Now, it doesn't guarantee the call is legitimate, but if you have that little check mark next to the number, when I see it now in many of the calls that I get on my cell phone, has that little check mark, you know that that is a legitimate number registered to that caller. Now, like I say, it still might be an illegal telemarketing call, but at least it's not a spoofed number. It's not, 911, IRS, the local hospital.
And finally, going back to the phony cures and treatments, in addition to the warning letters, you have had to go to court, haven't you, to stop some of these operations?
We have gone to court. I will say a couple of times now, we've gone to court and we've gotten emergency relief to shut down an operation. And that's worked. I will say that that's time consuming. So if we can do it with a warning letter, we will always do it with a warning letter. But for the folks who are more immune to warning letters, who maybe care less about the warning letter, then we're going to have to go to court. But it's tricky these days because a lot of courts are closed. And so, and even when they're not, it takes a while to get in front of a judge. And of course, everything has to be done virtually. So, we're not hesitating to go to court, and we will do that. We will continue to do that. But where we can get good relief quickly with a warning letter, then we're going to take that win.
And you have gone against this group called the Genesis 2 Church, which is offering a kind of bleach for treatment for autism, cancer, and now COVID-19. Did you stop them?
Right. So there are, colloidal silver, a variety of other cures that are kind of celebrated. Some of them are quite dangerous, of course, like injecting yourself with bleach. So that's that's another independent problem. There are other issues with these scam cures too. They might cause people to forego treatment that would otherwise help their condition. Now, we've seen this for years, of course, with products that falsely claim to cure or to treat diabetes or cancer, as you say, or other. And we've brought actions against companies like that for a long, long time, and we'll continue to do that.
And has your task been complicated by claims out of the White House from the president about various drugs that aren't approved for use, suggestions of bleach, et cetera, disinfectant?
Right. Not as far as I know. We've sent letters to right now. There's nothing that can cure, treat. This is what we said in our letters, that there's no product for which you can substantiate a COVID-19 cure. Now, that might change over time. I could imagine a situation where we would send a warning letter to a company and it would respond and say, well, look, there are authoritative people who are pitching this as a cure. So far, we haven't received that response to any of our warning letters. And we're continuing to send them and say, look, you can't say that this product treats or cures COVID-19 because there is no product that has been proven to do that yet. That may change. The other issue that we're seeing, I would say, is home test kits.
Andrews, yeah.
So that's another area where people have to be on guard.
Andrew Smith of the Federal Trade Commission, thank you so much for joining us. Keep up the good work there. It's important to protect people who don't otherwise know from these scams.
Thank you very much for having me.
Coming up, your questions about COVID-19 and the law, love, marriage, and divorce during a pandemic. Plus, the FBI screws up, revealing the name of a Saudi diplomat suspected of helping the 9/11 hijackers settle in the U.S. You're watching the Law and Crime Trial Network. We continue now. COVID-19 will be long remembered in American history as one of those searing moments that struck the American psyche, along with Pearl Harbor in 1941 and the 9/11 attacks in 2001. It's been 19 years since the 9/11 attacks, and this past week, Mike Isikoff of Yahoo News reported the FBI made a huge error, a goof-up, in attempting to keep secret the name of a Saudi diplomat who they suspected was helping the 9/11 hijackers. They actually left his name inside a court document, which Isikoff then reported. It's a major blow for the FBI's attempt to keep the name secret, and a big plus for the families trying to fight and sue the Saudi government. I talked recently with Andrew Maloney, a lawyer for the 9/11 families. Mr. Maloney, this was a very big oops for the FBI. What's the actual impact in terms of learning what actually happened and your case?
Well, it's a welcome mistake. The FBI is calling the disclosure to the court inadvertent. I tend to believe them that it was a mistake because they've been acting with an iron fist. They've been holding on to evidence and information about the 9/11 terror attacks when it comes to Saudi government officials for many, many years. And this particular disclosure took place in a sworn declaration by Jill Sanborn, who is the assistant director of the FBI's counterterrorism task force. And she redacted the name that we're talking about throughout the declaration, but missed one of them on page 7. And so that name was picked up by a reporter from Yahoo News, and it was made public. And that was 2 or 3 days ago. And now that Saudi official's name has traveled around the world. He is somebody that we knew about. It's somebody that we have asked for discovery on. He was at the time a Saudi diplomat at the embassy working for Ambassador Prince Bandar during the time when the hijackers were first arriving in the United States. And according to the FBI summary, a person who's now been revealed by the FBI themselves, tasked Thumairin Bayoumi in California to help the first 2 hijackers that arrived in the United States. So it advances the ball for us. More importantly, it sends a message to Americans and, frankly, to the Middle East that the case against them, their defense, is unraveling. And we've been pulling on threads for years, and this is a pretty big one.
So bottom line, your case is that somebody in the U.S. Embassy, the Saudi embassy in Washington, actually helped or gave instructions for other employees to help 2 of the hijackers settle in California prior to the 9/11 attacks?
Yeah, we've alleged that for years, but during the course of discovery, there was an FBI summary that was published in 2012. And you have to remember, that's many years after the official 9/11 Commission investigation had closed. They finished their investigation in 2004, but there were a team of field agents for the FBI and task force, NYPD task force in Los Angeles and San Diego that continued to work the case and follow leads. And by 2012, they had developed a substantial amount of evidence against various people that were involved with helping the first 2 hijackers that came to the United States, Hazmi and Midar. They were hijackers on American Airlines Flight 77 that was crashed into the Pentagon. They came here not speaking any English. They'd never been here before. And they were met and greeted by certain Saudis and other assistants, and some within the Saudi government that helped them get settled and established with money, with bank accounts, with an apartment, with the ability to get around, moving from Los Angeles to San Diego, and later beginning flight lessons, and then meeting up with other hijackers that were in other parts of the United States preparing for the attack. We have developed a substantial amount of evidence.
Nothing in these documents. Well, let me ask you. Yeah.
Go ahead.
But nothing in these documents suggests that the FBI proved that allegation, right?
No, the The language in that document refers to evidence. The FBI, since the disclosure, has claimed that it's a conclusory statement, but it shouldn't be conclusory. It should be treated as an investigative theory. That's what they're saying now. They're trying to walk back the significance of their own report. Frankly, the FBI, I do not believe, is in the habit of summarizing evidence in a report, particularly against foreign government officials, just willy-nilly. They have to have had a significant amount of evidence. For example, and I don't know what that evidence is, but for example, bank records of money transfers, phone contact, meetings, surveillance, other witnesses and informants. So that evidence is something that we've been seeking for many years. We're still seeking it now. They've refused to give it to us. The declaration that was filed last week was in support of the Attorney General's effort to keep the rest of the evidence a state secret. They claim disclosing it is a matter of national security, that it will jeopardize national security. And the 9/11 families are very disappointed in the Trump administration and the Attorney General and the FBI for sitting on what we believe is a pile of incriminating evidence against Saudi government officials, and cannot understand why they wouldn't provide that information to the families so that we could prove our case in court.
You obviously would like to question Mr. Al-Jarrar. Any chance of that happening?
Yeah, he's been on our deposition witness list for some time now. He's in Saudi Arabia. We believe he's in Saudi Arabia. We were advised that he recently retired from his government job. He continued to work for the Saudi government up until last year. We believe he's in Saudi Arabia. We have asked for his deposition. We have not been getting a lot of cooperation from the Saudi legal team, or at least their client, the government of Saudi Arabia. The court will conduct conferences in the very near future to determine who is going to be deposed and where those depositions will take place. The Saudis want our legal team for the families to travel to Saudi Arabia to conduct the depositions, and we would prefer not to do that. We would prefer to take the depositions at a neutral location somewhere in Europe.
Isn't there a second alternative explanation that perhaps the Saudis were trying to infiltrate Al-Qaeda and they tried to get in the good graces of these two hijackers, and of course that failed? But is that a possible explanation?
Well, it's always a possible explanation. I've heard that in this particular case a few times, and I've heard that. I'm familiar with that kind of defense, having been a federal prosecutor in New York. Very often when we arrested bad guys that we've been investigating, that would be the first thing they'd say. Oh, I was trying to get the goods on somebody else, and I was going to bring it to you. I was going to deliver them to you. I'm an informant for you. I'm willing to cooperate. If that were true in this case, there would be some record of that within the Saudi government and within the U.S. government. That has not been disclosed to us. So if that's a theory that either the Saudis or the Saudi intelligence or our own FBI or CIA is pushing, show it to us, give it to us. And that's really not the end of the story, even if that turns out to be true, because there's a lot that occurred during that time frame that we believe establishes that there were several Al-Qaeda sympathizers within the Saudi government at both low, high, and mid-level positions in the government. So the person at the embassy is one person, but there are at least 11 Saudi officials that we've identified in our lawsuit that we believe took an active role to help the hijackers.
And this particular diplomat, Al-Jarrar, he had left the U.S. Prior to the attacks. Is that not correct?
I don't know. We don't know a lot about his travel because the Saudi legal team has not produced the records that we've asked for. He was traveling, obviously, under a diplomatic passport. We know he was here in 1999 and the year 2000. The year 2000 was the critical year. January 15th, 2000 is when the first two hijackers arrived in the United States to Los Angeles. And Mr. Jarrar was at the U.S. Embassy at the time. I don't know when he left the country for good or the first time. We do know that Fahd Thumairi and Omar Bayoumi out in Los Angeles and San Diego, they did leave the United States just before the attacks. Fouad Thumari returned and eventually had his visa revoked and was essentially not allowed to have entry back into the United States. That's another question we have. Why did the FBI, if these people were suspects, why didn't they interrogate them? Why did they let them leave? Some of the allegations of an FBI cover-up are very disturbing. I know that a lot of the American public thinks that conspiracy theorists are crazy, but we have evidence here. And the disclosure this past week of a high-level Saudi official is not something that we made up. It's not just an allegation anymore. It's something that exists in the FBI records. So for anybody who doesn't give credit to the conspiracy theory, if that's what you want to call it, from the 9/11 families, we've just taken a step in the right direction in proving just that.
All right. Andrew Maloney, thank you so much for joining us. Keep us posted on the future developments.
I will, Brian. Thank you for your attention to this case. I know you've been following it for a long time. There'll be more to come for sure.
Coming up, your questions about COVID-19 and the law, love, marriage, and divorce in the time of a pandemic. You're watching the Law and Crime Trial Network.
Shannon, are you home? Police department, if anyone's inside, make yourself known.
Chris Watts just annihilated and buried his entire family.
Chris did not take into account security cameras. He didn't watch enough CSI.
The next door neighbor is showing the surveillance footage of Chris Watts loading up his truck at 5 o'clock in the morning.
It's on video 527.
You told me that she went on a play date. He honestly thought he could fool everyone.
Back now with your questions about COVID-19 and the law. And Rhonda Schwartz, the pandemic and the close quarters we've all been in certainly hasn't prevented people from falling in and out of love.
Well, with millions of Americans quarantined, many in close quarters, folks are beginning to wonder a year from now, are we going to see more babies, more marriages, or perhaps more divorces, Brian?
Well, we don't know until we'll find out at that point. At some point, though, people are finding ways to get married that are very, very novel. Take a look at some of what we've seen.
Coronavirus is ruining wedding plans for so many, but some couples are getting pretty creative to keep their wedding date and still have a ceremony.
We got married in their backyard and then had a little meal there, almost just like the wedding we would have had.
Complete with a socially distant first dance.
A bride in Boardman didn't let social distancing ruin her big day.
Annie and Cole just got married, so this is their honeymoon.
Because we're all locked in the house together, our staycation honeymoon is homeschooling and doing, work on Zoom.
The coronavirus altered their wedding plans, but love still ruled the day.
It was honestly more special than I think the wedding we had originally planned would have been.
It's very amazing just to still see her walk down the aisle, still allow for the church to have us, get married.
An El Reno couple did not let COVID-19 stop their wedding plans. They actually got married using their phones and an app called Zoom. You've probably heard about that.
Prepared for marriage, we're ready for marriage.
And we planned to get married. We decided that under no circumstances would we postpone.
So let's talk about all that. We're joined now by Heidi Harris from the firm Aronson, Maversky & Sloan, and Luigi Izzu of the Berman Law Group. And Heidi, let me start with you. Even during a pandemic, people can fall in and out of love. Are they able to get married? Are they able to get divorced? Heidi, are you there? All right. Well, let me go to you, Luigi. The courts are closed, but can people go ahead with these kind of ceremonies and dissolutions?
I've heard down in New York City is probably the only county, like Manhattan and Bronx and obviously Brooklyn and Queens. They have something set up where you can actually do it via the internet. So they're allowing people to get married. But outside of New York City, like Westchester County and Rockland, I don't believe they have the capabilities right now to do it. I think they call it Project Cupid. It's called Project Cupid, and actually people are going online and getting married who live within the city limits in New York State. Also, to the point of the divorces, I know I've been getting at least 2 or 3 calls a week looking for referrals for divorce attorneys because people, I guess, who already were upset with each other now trapped in the house together for long periods of time. So that's another flip side to the coin.
That kind of close proximity certainly presents its own issues, for better or for worse. Luigi, in terms of people going back to work now, you deal with employment law all the time. What are the big questions for people who are now finding their businesses, their companies are about to reopen?
Well, one of the biggest questions, obviously, which is clear, is whether or not it's safe. People are scared right now. I mean, I've just heard about a barbershop in Kingston that just reopened, I believe, last week and about a week and a half ago. And supposedly, just because the barbershop opened, 40 more people who went to that barbershop are contaminated and came positive with the corona. So it's a scary thing. I mean, they're giving guidelines and regulations. The executive branch, the governor of New York, is giving guidelines of how these companies are supposed to open. But the big issue is, are these companies following it? And if they're not, then if an employee sees it, what does an employee do? They're scared that they can't get unemployment because they're technically have a job. So they're willing and able to work and they have employment available. Well, what I can tell you is under OSHA, if you believe that there's a health concern or a safety issue and that your employer is not doing the right thing to give protective measures to keep you safe, you should voice your opinion. And if it's a reasonable belief that that danger is real and that a reasonable person would believe that, you don't have to show up. And you would still be able to remain on unemployment and probably even seek some other damages. And again, if anyone out there believes that their employer is not doing the proper safety equipment and protocols, they can reach out to our firm any day of the week because we're getting calls every day by all walks of life. And that's one of the main things that we do.
Luigi, a question for you from Rhonda Schwartz. Rhonda?
We're also hearing from a lot of small business owners who are worried about reopening, calling their employees back using the small business loan, but not being able to afford to have all those employees back, feeling that they're going to be trapped. Are those small business owners going to be in a lot of trouble if they don't employ everybody that was there before, even if they can't afford it?
Well, they have to use 75% of that loan for salary. So what that means is technically the business owner can use 25% for overhead, for mortgages or rent, etc. But 75% must be used for actual salaries of employees. The issue is where you have, like you said, an employer that's only working at a 10% capacity. Well, you used to have 50 employees. Well, now you only need 5. So now you have this loan sitting in your bank account and you need to spend 75% of that on salary. There's going to be some issues. Now, as long as I believe if they don't spend the entire amount and there's a leftover amount and they don't spend it on something else other than salary, I'm sure there's guidelines that will allow them to either return whatever portion they don't spend.
Luigi, federal prosecutors have brought a number of cases against people who applied for and got those grants and were essentially fraudulent in their applications. What's the risk for people to try to hedge the numbers, play around with the figures? That's a serious issue, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. You could have get your business licenses stricken from the state. You obviously would have federal charges brought against you because these are federal loans. Federal prosecutors are not the same as a state prosecutor. You're not walking in and getting a bargain. They will prosecute you to the fullest. You probably would see years and years in jail. I mean, obviously, if you, God forbid, you have any kind of immigration status or anything like that, and this happens, you probably would probably end up getting deported. I mean, there would be severe consequences. This is a time that the government's going out of their way to help the people. And if they find out, especially the federal government finds out that you're taking advantage in these times, I'm sure a federal prosecutor will have no problem looking for the max. And it could be years in jail, deportation, licenses lost, and basically families destroyed for something that would just be silly. And if you believe they're not going to find out, they absolutely will. It'll take time for them to catch up, but they will find out.
A fair warning. Coming up next, more of your questions about COVID-19 and the law. And as the country crawls back to a reopening, what are restaurants and other facilities going to do to stay in business? Take a look at this. One novel solution by one restaurant owner to make sure everyone keeps social distancing. You're watching the Law and Crime Trial Network.
Shannon, are you home? Police department, if anyone's inside, make yourself known.
Chris Watts just annihilated and buried his entire family.
Chris did not take into account security cameras. He didn't watch enough CSI.
The next door neighbor is showing the surveillance footage of Chris Watts loading up his truck at 5 o'clock in the morning.
It's on video 527.
You told me that she went on a play date.
He honestly thought he could fool everyone.
Back now with more of your questions about COVID-19 and the law. And Rhonda and Luigi, it was quite amusing to see that restaurant owner with a big giant inner tube to make sure the social distancing. But there are real rules, aren't there, Luigi, about what the restaurant owners have to do as they begin to reopen? In Connecticut, for instance, they're going to allow outdoor restaurants. Some states are allowing restaurants to open with outdoor and inside serving.
Well, yes, they're changing the guidelines weekly, but obviously they're going to try to use a 10% occupancy and then work their way up to see how that works. Obviously, I don't know how the restaurants are going to stay open with them doing that. I mean, you have restaurants that when they were full capacity, I mean, restaurant business is one of the hardest businesses in the world. And between the red line and becoming profitable is a fine line. So when you have these restaurants operating at 10, 20% capacity, I just don't see how it's going to work. But yes, the guidelines, they're going to keep the capacities low. They're going to keep the employees low and see how it works. And like the Governor Cuomo was saying, that if anything spikes up, obviously they'll revert backwards. I don't think a bubble.
As you say, it's a tough business. Not at all. As you say, it is a tough business. You know the old joke, how do you make $1 million in the restaurant business? You start with $2 million. So, Luigi, a question for you on employment for one of our viewers sent in this video. Take a look at this.
Can I still get unemployment if my employer denies it if I have 2 school-aged children home from school due to COVID-19?
So lots of questions along that line, Luigi. What's your advice? What's your best thought on this?
Well, yes, there's state guidelines and there's federal funding right now that's allowing people that they're caring for a loved one with COVID-19, they're allowed to stay home to take care of their, obviously in this case, this woman's children. My heart goes out to both of them. I hope everyone's well. But yes, she's allowed to collect. She has to take care of a family member. Obviously, she's the only one who can do it. She's the mom, and the guidelines will allow her to still collect unemployment.
Okay. And Luigi, a question for you from Rhonda Schwartz. Rhonda?
So, Luigi, we've heard from folks who are really still nervous about going back to work as things reopen. And what we're hearing the most is, if I go back to work and get sick, am I still going to have benefits, or am I just going to get fired? Is there something that protects those workers who are returning but who are fearful?
Well, yeah. So first of all, like I said before, if they'll return to work and they feel that that environment is not safe and it's a reasonable belief, they should leave. And then they should file to the state attorney general, make the complaints, make the grievances, file for unemployment. Now, if you return to work and God forbid you do get sick, there's workers' compensation. If you're employed and you become ill or sick or injured during the employment, workers' comp is now accepting claims. People are making claims. Over the last 3 or 4 weeks, I probably referred over 200 workers' comp cases to a workers' comp attorney that have the COVID-19 as a result of working. So yes, there will be something in place that if they do return, become ill as a case of employment, get COVID-19, they can go out on unemployment, they can go out on workers' comp. Workers' comp would pay for the medical bills and pay them their salary while they're out dealing with the illness.
Luigi, during this time, of course, you try to work things out, but at some point this could lead to action in court. But the courts aren't available to you, are they, at this point?
They are not. They are not. Literally, I have about 15 summons and complaints sitting in front of me behind this computer waiting to be filed. No new actions in New York State are being accepted. It was stayed to May 20th. I believe now it's to June 17th. Obviously, the courts are backed up. They're only dealing with active cases right now. They're trying to do video. We're doing some Skyping for some conferences, some motion practices going on in certain counties, but not all. The courts are basically just in a stagnant For anything new, you're not bringing anything out. But once these courts do open up, like I said, my law firm, the Berman Law Group, we deal with civil litigation in broad scales throughout the country, and we have numerous people calling on a daily basis with actions against employers, hospitals that they believe violated certain laws and caused them to be injured or lose loved ones. So there'll be multiple actions being filed once these courts open up. At the time that they do open up, I have no idea how they're going to handle all these attorneys trying to file all these cases that are backlogged for months.
And the issue of picking a jury. There's a report in the Wall Street Journal this morning about out west using a high school gym as a place to put all the prospective jurors and keep them 6 feet apart as they try to pick a jury. And they, because people do have, at least in criminal trials, there's a right to a speedy trial, right?
Yes, they do. And that's going to be a big issue. I mean, obviously, they're going to try to accommodate the speedy trial. I mean, if you were picked for jury duty, it's going to be hard to see how they're going to get people, even if you're putting them in a gymnasium, to just walk in with a cup of coffee in the morning, stand around with about 200, 300 other people in a huge gym, hoping that they're spaced out. I'm pretty sure my gut's telling me that these people are going to come up with an excuse not to show up. And the ones that do, it's going to be quite difficult. I mean, it's not just picking the jury. I mean, you can have trials that go on for 6 to 8 weeks. You can be sequestered in murder cases. So it's not just picking it. Where are they going to sit in the courtroom? And if I was a defense criminal attorney, let's say they want to do Skype juries or Zoom juries, I would argue that it's not personable enough. I mean, this man's life is on the line. You want to have that person face to face, look at the jury. I mean, if you're looking on a computer screen, it's like watching a TV show. How are you really holding someone's life in their hand, looking at a computer tablet? I mean, you would want it in real time, in real life. That's at least my opinion if I was a defense attorney for criminal law. So I'm sure there'll be plenty of motions arguing we're not moving forward until they're in real life.
Good point. Another question for you. Republicans in the Senate are talking about a bill that would essentially give protection from liability for employers who open up and then employees get sick. What do you make of that? Was that constitutional even?
As to it being constitutional, I don't believe there's a constitutional right to sue. But at the end of the day, even if they even if they give some kind of protection, stating that if you open up and you follow the guidelines, we'll protect you from being sued, I'm sure there would have to be some kind of stipulation in saying that the person that was injured still would have to be compensated in some other way. The federal government would step in, perhaps, because picture one of your family members goes to work, does the right thing, an employer fails to do something, something goes wrong, and God forbid your loved one is gone. I mean, you cannot bring her or him back. And then someone's just going to turn around and say, well, sorry, I see here the new statute that was made in June 15, 2020 says you can't do nothing about it. I believe there would be a hard time for people to swallow that. Even though we need to get businesses open, there would probably have to be some kind of stipulation in there that they would have to follow guidelines. If they don't follow the guidelines, they would be able to sue. And even if they followed the guidelines, there would have to be some kind of compensation the government would have to offer to those people who are injured.
All right, one final question. We have just about 30 seconds, Luigi. What's this going to mean for law firms like yours and others around the country? Is this going to fundamentally change the practice of law?
Well, yes. We're a national law firm. We're in multiple states, so we were already able to do remotely and work from home. Obviously, I deal with people in Florida, Vegas, LA. I have paralegals that are in Southern California, so we were able to do that. I think a lot of the smaller firms now are starting to gear up for that. So I believe people are going to be able to work from home more, be more productive. I believe that like 50H hearings in New York City have gone virtual. I kind of argued that I like to do the 50H hearing in person, and I got a letter stating we are forever going virtual, so that has been changed. So I believe a lot of things like court appearances, compliance conferences, depositions are going to be more virtually, which would probably make it easier for the attorney so he doesn't have to travel to multiple places and probably can get more done. It's a new world, definitely a new world.
Absolutely. It absolutely is. Well, thank you so much, Louisa, for being here. My other guests, Andrew Maloney and Andrew Smith from the FTC. This is Brian Ross. Jesse Weber's here tomorrow. And thanks to all our staff who had us on the air and off the air.